Welcome to the Triclinium, a podcast named after the three-sided table used in the Lord's Supper, where you are invited to join the three of us as we think through matters of Christian faith, practice, and community. My name is Nate Lead, and as always, I'm here with my co-hosts Jacob Hawley and Eric Bergers, and today we're going to be discussing Christianity and culture, specifically around holidays and how Christians can engage with the culture well, or even if we should. So I'm going to kick it over to my co-host. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. Looking great. Looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, me too. It'll be fun.
You just say looking great?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I said that. Eric's looking great. Just wanted to say that.
For everybody who can't see Jacob, which is everybody,
Eric looks disgusting right now.
Is looking great. Jacob looks great. Eric looks tired.
Yeah.
And I just woke up. So
yeah.
I'm so tired, dude. I'm very tired.
Oh man. By the end of this, I'm hoping that we'll all be Amish. That's my hope, is that we won't engage with culture at all. We'll just recluse ourselves.
Okay, there we go.
That was a joke.
I think we just end that there.
Some people say that though, like specifically in the Reformed tradition. Like I've seen people on YouTube argue for that. Yeah, recently, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Eric, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm tired. I had a long day today, but I'm good.
Yeah. Hey, who did you see in public today?
It doesn't matter.
It does matter. You gotta tell everybody who you saw.
Randomly, me and my wife spontaneously went to Huntington, West Virginia today, with no clue that this was a Division I college town with Marshall University being there. And so we were walking around the streets down there, and just out of the blue, like had no idea. I look up and across the street, Theo Vaughn, the comedian, was just right there, and I tap her on the shoulder. I say, "Aaliyah, that's Theo Vaughn right there across the street," and she goes, "Who?" And I don't think well, maybe he did. I'm not sure, but we kind of just walked right past him. Because I don't know, we're both shy and don't like bothering people. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so randomly he was gonna have a concert that night. Actually, it's starting I think in like 30 minutes or something.
Oh wow!
Out there in Huntington. So, but yeah, it was a weird day.
Of all the comedians, I feel like Theo Vaughn is one where you could probably just like tap him on the shoulder and he would get into a full-blown conversation with you, you know?
Probably, yeah. Like, as we were, like, because we walked down the street a bit, and he just stood there forever, like, talking with his little entourage there.
Yeah.
And we were coming back down, and he crossed the street as we came back down, and then, like, took, like, 2 pictures with different people, so I was like,
Yeah, darn. Just starts going in on a conspiracy theory with you, and you're like, wait, what's happening right now?
Yeah, are we recording an episode right now?
Yeah.
He's an interesting one, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, hey, so let's get started on, I think that we all have a lot to say in regards to culture and how we can interact with culture well. And so in a surprise turn of events, I'm going to read a quote from Karl Barth, which is Jacob's guy. Okay, so Barth is an influential theologian of the 20th century. So he had this quote, and I want to read it and then get your guys' response to it, and hopefully this will kind of launch our conversation. So he said,
"Man, you're making Jacob stay here."
Yeah, I know, yeah. So I'll read this quote. He said, "Take your Bible and take your newspaper and read both, but interpret newspapers from your Bible." So
I've actually heard that quote before.
Yeah,
I actually like that
I've
one,
heard it too. I remember attributing a quote similar to this to C.S. Lewis, and I think he said that Christians should have one hand on the Bible and one hand on a newspaper.
Yeah. I think Billy Graham said the same thing too.
Okay,
if I'm not mistaken.
I think every major Christian has said that.
Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Oh my god. Yeah.
So this quote is obviously just saying, hey, Christians should not be of the world, but in the world. You know, we should be interacting with the events, with the news that's happening, with everything that's going on, and we should interact with it through the lens of our Bible. So, hopefully this is just to launch our conversation. So what's your guys' first reaction to hearing something like this?
I think it might be helpful to frame the discussion around what we first started talking about a little bit ago. The quote is a good one in the broad sense. I think to get us into the nitty-gritty of like why this question is important, Eric, would you introduce us just to like the question that you opened us up with right before we were recording and what kind of led us into this?
Yeah, let me try to recall it because I was talking
Spooky
about. Yeah, oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, so in our last episode, we were kind of talking. We kind of hit the topic of Christians engaging with culture, at least in the form of arts, the arts, I guess you could say. So book writing, literal art itself, and different forms of media and whatnot, and how can Christians do that? And I think we have more to touch on there, but that kind of, if you want to like take that question and then back it up a little bit, you could ask the question, how do Christians engage in culture, broadly speaking, generally speaking? And, you know, kind of my thought process with that came from a conversation I had with somebody, you know, since the holidays are around, like how do Christians engage with clearly like cultural norms such as the holidays like Halloween, for example, or Christmas with Santa Claus, for example, or, you know, you name it. And, you know, oftentimes you'll hear like even people from the Christian camps as well, and you probably see this more in like fundamentalist Baptist churches who will, you know, try to say that every Christian holiday that's regularly practiced today is pagan and has pagan roots somehow, some way. I'm not going to go into the depths of all of that, but you know, it gets you thinking, like, where are the lines that we're drawing for how Christians engage with culture? And I think the holidays are a good reminder of how to do that because it's so normally practiced even by Christians today. So I will pose the question to you both in response to that and say, how do Christians engage with culture? Where do we draw the lines?
Yeah.
Let's start. Let me get a little more specific. Maybe let's start with like we were talking. We kind of started talking about Halloween, so maybe we'll go from there. Halloween is usually a pretty controversial one, and I think a little more stark than the other ones, like Christmas, for example. So Halloween, as we all know, as Nate himself was saying before we started recording, is almost like a weird culture of horror and death that's being put on display before our country and other countries alike, but we're in America, so we'll talk about our country. And so you have death and sorcery and witchcraft and things that are, you know, quote unquote, in the culture at that point. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would even say, you know, I would go so far to say that those things are being celebrated. For one, you know, it's a holiday, which is just a term for celebration. And so you know, people will spend exorbitant amounts of money buying decorations, buying mechanical ghosts to, you know, doing up their lawns, and people decking out their cars and like all these things, and then, you know, the costumes that people wear themselves. It just it looks like a glorification of those things, and I'm gonna sound like a stickler when it comes to Halloween for sure. Halloween is not my favorite part of the year, just because
nor is it mine, and my birthday is the day before Halloween.
That's poetic justice if I've ever heard it. No, it's just like it's just a weird time for me. I mean, I never liked I mean, I watched The Walking Dead, but I never enjoyed like zombies or horror movies or like Paranormal Activity. Like, I never enjoyed ghost stories or any of these things, like jump scare movies. I've seen them, but they're not enjoyable to me, and I think that people actually do enjoy them, which is really interesting. And what's also interesting is I remember having a conversation with my mom years ago about Halloween and about horror movies and all these things, and you know, it's really interesting that we live in a time where people pay to feel fear. People pay to go to a haunted mansion or a haunted whatever and get like jump scared in real life. Like that's something that they're willing to part with their money from, or with their money for. So it's a really interesting like cultural moment that people will pay for these things. Like it's just so strange because I feel like throughout all of human history there's been enough fear to go around where people haven't had to pay for it. So it's just weird that it's like, you know, billions upon billions of dollars every year spent on one night really, or one, you know, weekend or whatever. So it's a weird time for me at least. But Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I almost wonder. So I want to pose a question to you guys, as somebody who's not all that bothered by Halloween, and actually as somebody who kind of enjoys it, who likes horror movies, like all that kind of stuff. What do you guys think is the root of the attraction towards these things? Like, why, right? Like, because you're saying it's strange, and obviously, like, it on its face, it does seem strange. But, like, what is the underpinning principle? What are humans chasing when they elevate themselves, or when they elevate these kind of these, like, druids and things that, like, primordially scare us, right? Like, it seems like every culture has known something like a ghost, right? So why do you think that is? Like, what draws us in?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it's interesting. What you said just there made me think, like, every culture has its own horror stories. You know, the campfire stories that the elders will pass on to the younger generations, like, you know, Chupacabra, Loch Ness Monster, Barefoot, you know, like all these kind of like...
I mean, even Halloween itself, I think has... well, at least as some claim, I'm not sure, I don't know the historical facts surrounding Halloween, but, you know, some will say it develops out of a medieval story regarding a figure who, like, interacted with demons and whatever, and besides the point, like, even Halloween itself has some weird backstory that develops over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to answer your question, Jacob, I mean, I don't really know. I'm not gonna, you know, pretend like I'm in people's minds that really love Halloween, but I mean, you could probably answer that better than us, because
it probably has too individualized of an answer, because I feel like you can give a number of answers to that question. Like, to be honest with you, the first answer that came to my mind is like, just sinful desire. Period. You know.
Thanks,
like,
Eric. Thanks.
But on the other hand, you could also say, well, because I feel like a number of people would have answered your question that way, Jacob. I know a number of people who probably would have answered your question that way.
I also know a couple of people that way, yeah.
Yeah, and on the other hand, you could spin it a different way and say that, like, this desire to fear something is, and I feel like this is where you were probably going with it, is what's at the root of it. To be in awe, or to be, you know, probably even reverent of something and its power, or its majesty, even, if you will, is behind that. And I would imagine Jacob was probably going to take that and say it's just a misordering or a disorder of how that should be done. We shouldn't show awe or reverence or fear, which is a biblical category, towards these sort of things, but rather towards the Lord himself. And then if we do that, if we show a proper fear of the Lord, as the Bible calls us to, then all of these holidays and everything else somewhat becomes trivial, because they're not real. They're just sort of costumes.
Yeah. Eric, I think you just hit the nail on the head too. I mean, because even in that, it opens up a couple of different answers in my mind too. You know, like the desire to be fear, I think can be said another way as like a break from the norm. You know, like the kind of mundane day in, day out of daily work life. You know, of whatever it may be. it kind of comes along and it kind of shakes you out of it, and it's like it reminds you that, oh, there's fear to be felt, for those that don't feel fear daily. But then also, I think another desire, some people might answer this way, is to be feared, is to have power over others in that way.
Yes.
To be scary, to have a scary, to like dress up your house, to be like feared, to be that house on the block that's like, don't come here, or come at your own risk.
I imagine
that comes down to power and wanting power over people.
I was gonna say, I imagine it's probably not even like a scary type of fear itself. Sometimes, like the teenager who goes all out on his costume to go to that Halloween party at his high school isn't doing it probably because he wants to be scary to other people. It's probably because he wants to be way cooler than other people, and he wants
or
some
noticed.
sort of
attention.
some sort of form of attention or dominance over other people. So in answer to your question, Jacob, is I feel like there's a number of ways you could answer that, because there's a number of motivations that people have behind things like Halloween, or things you could take it a step back and just say cultural things generally. People have a number of different motivations to do anything. So it's almost too broad of a question, I would think.
I know, but it is really funny too, just to sit back and think, pose the question why, just to holidays in general. Why do we dress up like skeletons on Halloween? Why do we do Santa Claus every year? Why is there an Easter bunny? It's kind of like, why is that a thing? But we all go along with it. So it's really funny, actually.
There has to be a measure of prudence, I think, and this is why Halloween is the interesting one to me, and how we approach these different things, because we don't celebrate Halloween the same way that we celebrate Christmas, per se, like totally different dynamics at the core of each of these holidays. And I guess to stick more with Halloween for now, it does have more to do with fear and horror and death, and you could go on. But Jacob, I'm curious to hear what your answer was going to be to that question. I didn't want to just put words in your mouth,
of motivations.
Yeah. Well, so I guess I'm kind of thinking it through on the fly with you guys. So this might not be the most articulated answer, or well-articulated answer. I think that part of it has to do with the sanitization of our culture, to where death is not really grappled with in the same visceral sense that it was grappled with for centuries. And so I think that Halloween, for our American or European, consciousness is to kind of remind us in a visceral way that of this mysterious fate that we all share. So that's part of it, I think. And in that same line, those who do not think about death very much will not think about ghosts very much, or what lies beyond the physical world. And so I think it's also a gateway back to considering realms that we have lost sight of as modern men and women. And so I think that's the thing that draws people in.
Let me ask you a clarifying question, Jacob.
Sure.
Just so I'm making sure I'm understanding you. Are you saying that like folks in our culture today have taken these themes that you've kind of just said in order to trivialize what actually lies, it signifies beyond it? Like, because in my mind, like Halloween is, at least in today's culture, I mean, I guess it depends on how you approach it, but I see Halloween as kind of like a kiddish holiday nowadays, where like all of these things are almost cartoonized, or if that's a word, cartoonized, but like made into like little kiddish figures. So like skeletons and witches and demons and you name it, you know.
Yeah.
Some of them look more realistic than others, but you know, everybody, it's almost like they're made like so that, you know, people have like some kick out of it, but they're not like actually scary when you're walking down the street.
Sure. Sure.
At least if you're not a kid, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's like, it's almost like it almost trivializes to the point where it's like, yeah, these things don't actually exist, so we shouldn't be scared of these things. And
Yeah.
I think on some level Christians have to push back on some sense, because some of the things that occur in Halloween we would say exist per se, demons.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I digress. You keep going.
No, you're good. That's a good question. So I think,
But was I on the right track with what you were saying, or did
I would
take
actually
it in
say
the wrong way?
I'd say Halloween has a specific design that can go both directions. I think that like there are certain houses that you'll go to on Halloween if you still trick or treat, where it's like, I don't really want my kid going up to that house because they have done a very good job of making this look terrifying, right? So I think there's some realism to it, trying to approach things in a realistic way. Of course, you're walking down the street and you're seeing all these goobers dressed up as fairies and stuff like that. And I think in that sense, it is kind of trivialized. But so in a certain sense, it might be a way for us as a culture to maintain a knowledge of death in our children. Like to educate our children that death exists, right? Usually a pet has to die before a kid understands death, but this is another inroad, you could say. I also think, though, that like kind of moving towards the more horror movie culture and that kind of like desire to be scared, I think that is actually it's just a touching point with something that's more in our nature than in our mind. Like it's in the same sense that, like, if I know that a snake is a gardener snake and I can categorize the type of snake it is, I know it's not poisonous and I know it can't hurt me, but I go to grab it and it moves, I have that very deep, like, I gotta get out of here. You know, it's that it's touching that part of us, that like lizard brain that you know, that will have been in every culture, right? You could say the essential part of humanity. I think it's scratching that itch and pulling us back to grapple with a belief that, whether or not you think it is actually true, tends to play out among humans. That we let's say we act as if ghosts exist. We act as if there are forces on our life that we cannot maintain. We talk about luck all the time, and I don't think we actually believe in luck, but we certainly treat the world around us as if there's real luck, right? We're superstitious.
Right.
We're just funny creatures that way, you know. I think that the Enlightenment attempted to get rid of belief in all things that weren't rational, and you know, ghosts didn't make the cut, right? And so they got cut out of our public consciousness. But I think things like Halloween remind us, in a weird sense, that we can't get rid of that, right? Like there's a
Oh, that's interesting.
There's
so
a
you
deep
take Halloween as almost a signpost to, so you almost think the opposite of what I just said then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, that's interesting too, because I mean, in this conversation, I'm thinking of the El Dia de los Muertos, you know, the Day of the Dead, you know, which is a widely celebrated holiday in Hispanic culture, and I just looked it up a little bit, and you know, it's a day to remember the dead. You know, it's from what I read, I think it was from the Mexican Heritage Museum. The day is actually to, like, not only remember the people that have gone, but also to remember that their legacy lives on in you, and so it kind of unites the living and the dead. So it's, but it's not caricaturized. If that makes sense.
Characterized?
No. So like a caricature,
Oh,
like a
I
caricature
see.
of ghosts, becomes like an animated ghost or
Right,
whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So Halloween typically in the U.S. is caricaturized. You become your caricature of Captain America or of a ghost or of a demon or whatever. You're not actually becoming that thing. So it's fictionalized. How about that? Halloween typically is, but I think the Dia de los Muertos, and excuse my Spanish, because it's not very good, but it's a day meant to your point, Jacob, remember that death is a part of this world, that we will eventually die, that people have died before us, but that we're still connected to those people in a very like serious and realistic way, which I think is what you're trying to argue for. Maybe Christians can use Halloween in that way.
Yeah.
But I think more broadly, I think the way that the culture views it is very much so that like a caricaturization. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Fictionalization is probably a little bit better. It becomes fantasy almost.
Interesting. Yeah, you guys are taking it almost the opposite direction that I see it from, I guess. In a sense, like I see Halloween as like a dumbing down of what's actually really out there, so that people don't have to actively think about or care about these things. But you're saying they're a signpost to people.
So I am saying that too. So I'm saying
Okay.
these actual things that are real or the kind of evil spiritual forces. So Halloween, I think I mentioned this before we started recording, but Halloween is a holiday that probably most closely ties that fake fictionalization with real world reality, in that there are fictionalized witches and witchcraft and demons and whatnot in Halloween, but there's also real life witchcraft and demons and the occult, satanic worship, all that stuff. I think Halloween, to your point, Eric, Halloween has definitely merged those two worlds more so than probably any other holiday. I mean, I can't think of every holiday right off the top of my head, but there's no real life Santa Claus that Christmas is bringing is naturalizing to everybody.
Unless you're saying it was Saint Nicholas who punched Arius in the face. Just kidding.
So
Go ahead.
Halloween, it blends reality with a fictionalized version of reality. I think what Jacob and I were saying is that how Christians can interact with Halloween is in a much more respectful way, where we use the holiday to view death in our own lives, teach our children about death, about even our ancestry and how that works out, or how we line up with our ancestry or something like that. Is that
Yeah.
true, Jacob?
Yeah,
In a way.
and I don't know that I was necessarily drawing any conclusions about how Christians ought to engage with it, but
Okay.
I think my bigger thing is well, and to your question, Eric, I think that we can't help but caricaturize, because we caricaturize everything as Americans. We can't take anything seriously. So I think that as those who genuinely
At least in today's America, yeah.
Yeah, sure. In our metaphysics, or in our understanding of the way that things work outside of what we can see, touch, and feel, and what we can measure, our metaphysics is locked out of believing in those things. We can't get ourselves to believe in those things, and so the only way that we could engage with them is in this kind of fictitious holiday. But I think what's interesting is that you find this deep fascination with this holiday that grows, and with similar things, similar with like true crime documentaries, or things about serial killers. It's the same
Sure.
sort of thing. It's like we don't really believe that humans could be that malevolent, and then every once in a while it happens, and then everybody has their eyes glued to it. It's like driving a car and you see a crash on the right side. What do? You gooseneck.
Yeah.
Or you rubberneck. Right? Not gooseneck. You rubberneck. That's not goosenecking. I don't think that's what it's called. But you rubberneck because you just saw what you thought you go about telling yourself all day isn't going to happen to you, right? I'm not going to get in a crash. It's not going to be me. And then you see it and you're like, holy crap.
Yeah, Lauren actually she says this to me occasionally. She's like, "Can you believe that people get murdered? Like that's their life. They get murdered by somebody they know or don't know. Like
Right.
their life ends because they get murdered. Like it's almost hard
Yeah.
for us to wrap our minds around, that somebody could kill another person.
Yeah.
Like for her, she's just like, I just can't believe that people get murdered. Like it's not the actual act that I think that she doesn't believe, but it's like that would just suck. Like she says, that sucks to get murdered.
Yeah.
Maybe that says something somewhat positive about the United States at this point in time, because on the one hand, it's like, well, it seems if we're even asking that question, then we've suppressed that activity so much so that it's shocking when it actually happens in real life.
I think also, I mean, we're kind of talking about murder now, but murder has also been fictionalized, has also been almost not glorified, but it's like when a really good murder mystery story comes out, everybody's like, oh, that was such a good story, like, oh, that was awesome, But like Agatha Christie, her whole thing is writing murder stories. And I mean, you know how many cop shows are on TV and how many like murder mystery shows and all that stuff. And those are all fictional too. And there are true crime documentaries. Clue is another one. Yep,
Yeah.
that's a game. We literally play.
We
Murder
play.
people.
Yeah.
So it's been fictionalized, and we watch it almost as an event, and it seems like, oh yeah, that happens in the movies, kind of like superheroes too. It's like that's not real, that's fake blood on the TV show and whatnot. It's like,
Right.
Yeah.
I think I want to do two things, unless Jacob, you had something you want to finish up saying. Okay, there's two things I want to do then at this point. One, I just want to summarize what both of you guys have said, at least what I've heard from you, and then play devil's advocate against you a little bit to further it down.
I love it.
So essentially,
Devil's advocate on Halloween? What are you doing, Eric?
Oh,
This is a Christian podcast.
Oh goodness, excommunicate him.
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially what I'm like, if I'm super boiling it down, you guys see Halloween as kind of an outlet to be able to teach kids about the transcendent and natural things that are going to occur, such as death, no matter what.
Yeah.
I know that's super boiled down, but
I think that's what it could be. I think maybe that's a good way for Christians to approach the holiday in general. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I don't see that big of an issue with, especially with kids, like getting dressed up and, going like, around here, there's a really nice neighborhood. It's really rich and the houses are beautiful and it's, very safe and the sidewalks are really nice. Like it's a beautiful neighborhood. It's very rich. Like it'd be super fun, to go and take our kid trick-or-treating there or our kids trick-or-treating there, because it's like at some point it becomes a cultural thing. It's like, and that's something to talk with your coworkers about, and you can go and even go do that with people from your church group or home group or whatever. So I'm not super against, like, at some degree, getting dressed up, having a fun moment, because that's kind of the cultural impact of it. But I think that the more like spiritual side of it, I think it could be a good way just to talk about these things. It's a really natural way for parents to talk with death about their kids, talk with death with their kids, not about their kids. So sorry.
Talking with death about their kids.
Yeah, sorry.
Or really any topic that Halloween brings up. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because unless that, family pet does pass and you talk about it then, it is kind of just a natural way to be like, hey, this is a thing, and like whatever else, it's brought up anyway, so you might as well talk about it. That's what it could be. I mean, I don't think that's what it is now, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Jacob, what else? I didn't summarize well enough. Let's hear it.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, and
There you go.
I feel bad because I'm adding to the conversation now when you're trying to boil it down, but
That's okay.
But it is interesting that it's one of the only holidays at this point that actually draws people out of their homes. Like, is there any other holiday where people?
Yeah, I
are
mean, I
drawn-
guess you could argue Christmas and Thanksgiving. Like, you have to go to the store to.
Yeah,
like,
that's true. But like, I mean,
Or
like
travel
interacting
to
in
go
your
to somebody
neighborhood,
else's home.
or
like,
that. Yeah.
because
I mean, 4th of July,
But
like
I
parties and
see
fireworks.
yeah,
I
that's
see your
good.
point.
That's good.
I see your point. Like, people
Easter
are out on the
hugs.
street interacting with other people intentionally.
Yeah.
Whereas, you could just go to the store and get back in your car and go home for.
Yeah,
for-
and most people
themselves.
prepare to be visited in their homes. Like, people buy
Right.
candy and get ready. So
Yeah.
that's just interesting. But I think, yeah, I would just nuance and say, for your summation, I think it is the way that the world has learned how to cope with its deep primordial belief in demons and the otherworldly and death, with while also not crumbling in terror or admitting it back into its immediate metaphysics, right? Like that, it's kind of trying to address death and the spirits and all that kind of stuff on its own terms. So I'm not saying Christians. I haven't given an idea yet for what Christians should do. I don't know yet, but
So let's. I'll create a hypothetical then here, and we'll engage with it, because on some level, I think, like, it's been said here that Halloween can at least be used in some way to talk about the supernatural on some level, even amongst people, amongst you and your kids, and whatnot.
Yeah, and I would say, because I said that, so I would say that in the same way that, Easter gets brought up to talk about Jesus' death on the cross and the resurrection. So the holiday has a purpose, and I think that Christians can kind of reclaim the purpose of Halloween and use that, at least in a more direct and at least in a more intentional way. In the same way that we can talk about America's founding and the revolutionaries' independence, gaining their independence from the British monarchy, at 4th of July. So I think that that's where I'm at right now with Halloween, is like Christians can use it as a way to, or can kind of reclaim its purpose. So sorry.
Okay, so that's good. I'm glad you said that, because I'll go into my devil's advocate here, because I could say to you, well, talking about the American Revolution and people gaining their independence, or Easter, where we're talking about the resurrection of Christ, both have to do with positive, good things that are being added to the world. Like, freedom is good, and Christ raising from the dead for the sins of mankind is a good thing. Halloween, on the other hand, is talking about bad things that the Bible says we shouldn't do. So, like, the two kind of major texts that I think come up with Halloween is both Deuteronomy 18 and Galatians 5. But I'll read because I've had these ones said to me before, so I just kind of want to hear your guys' thoughts. But Galatians 5 says, "Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God." And then people go on and use some texts like these, like 3 John 1:11 says, "Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God." And furthermore, Ephesians 5 says, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." So you kind of have this thing that keeps going on and on in Scripture that says, at least people will argue, I should rather say, is we shouldn't be taking part in these things. These things are darkness. Stay away. If you do these, you're enabling sin, essentially, death. You are creating a culture which is against God by you dressing up as, I don't know, like a goblin or or worse, like a demon, dressing up like a demon, or dressing up like whatever have you. So how would you guys respond to that? Does that sort of undercut the usability, I guess, of the ability for Christians to use Halloween as we've been saying, as like a pointing to the supernatural? Because you guys on the one hand are saying, well, yeah, it's great to use Halloween because we can use it in this way, but somebody can come back to you and say, well, no, the Bible says don't partake in these things at all. And so it becomes kind of a matter of authority. How would you, I know that was a lot of text to throw at you, but that's kind of some of the common ones that are used. So how would you respond to that?
I think I would respond by writing a "God hates goblins" sign and carrying it around City Hall for a while. No, so I think that in order for us to believe that Halloween is a problem, we first have to believe that the caricatures that people are putting out there are attempts at engaging in the real thing. So in other words, Paul is writing in a context in which idols were actually sacrificed to, in which sorcery was not uncommon, in which all of these things had like practical and practiced instantiations in their culture. That is not the place we live in now. We have a completely different outlook on the supernatural life. Most people barely believe in God and like would feel foolish saying they believe in like spirits and ghosts and things like that. So if somebody on Halloween is genuinely attempting to reach spirits through some sort of divining medium, then yeah, I would say Christians shouldn't go to that party or do that thing.
Yeah.
But if someone's dressing up as a witch, and not even a witch, right? Because like that's not what witches look like. That's what we believe witches look like.
I would make
carried
that same
down
case.
heritage. Or zombies, right? Like all of these. There's no such thing as a biblical zombie, right? Like what do we, So
excuse me, sir. You could say Samuel.
Yeah,
would-
yeah. We could talk
Anyways,
about that.
sorry,
But
go
the
ahead.
problem is that I think that we don't actually believe in any of these things. So what ends up happening is Christians look like idiots when they're screaming about Halloween, because it genuinely sounds like we think that the people that are dressing up like witches are trying to become them. And that's so not what's happening.
And they don't even believe in these things.
They don't even believe in these things, right? Like they're farther from a supernatural worldview than we are, and yet and we're terrified that they're going to succumb to supernatural darkness, right? Like I think that's our place. Is I think that's where I think we go wrong. So
Jacob, what if this is a big what if, but I could see some people I know probably saying something like this. What if demons are basically puppeteering this whole thing with Halloween, and by people even dressing up, even though they don't believe in it? They're engaging in some sort of demonic activity by nature of demons being behind the culture itself.
Well, they are for sure doing that, because they're also doing that with every other place in human life. In fact, I think that's the fact that Halloween is at least a little bit overt about it
Yeah.
may actually make it one of the more sacred moments, because everywhere else we just kind of think that that everything else works by the mechanics of human civilization or natural law or fates or whatever else. Like, demons are everywhere influencing everything. That doesn't mean like we should shut down all the coffee shops because demons have had work done there, right? Like I think that's it would be the weakest place for their participation would be Halloween, because it would be a show of how little we believe in them. We're making fun of them. The whole thing is making fun of demons, right? Like, and like picturing.
Let me phrase it this way, because I think that in a way, if there was this, my buddy sent me an Instagram post years ago, and it stuck with me because it was this guy who just kind of went on a tangent about, like, if I was the devil, I would do these things. I would just and it was like everything that's happening. I think that you guys might have heard that. It's I think it's widely circulated, but so to play like devil's advocate, if I was the devil, I would almost want people to become numb to the fact that demons are reality in the world. And how would I do that? I would make it really commonplace to like, I would make demons almost a caricature. I would make them fictionalized, so that they're not, it doesn't feel real. And then it is real, because it is real. So I want people to become numb to the fact that these things are real, so that I can keep influencing them. And they won't say, it's not a demon. It's not the spiritual forces of evil that are attacking me or attacking my loved ones. That those things don't exist.
Yeah. But so, it would seem like...
I think that... Go ahead.
I think it would seem to me like the response then for Christians would be to conduct exorcisms and like play with spirits, because then you're actually showing them to be real, right? Wouldn't that be the natural remedy for us, is actually to engage in something even more strong than Halloween, to show,
rather than just running away from it or
trivializing it, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I understand that approach, but again, Halloween is like the one time where something like the supernatural is even really discussed in a public way. So if anybody's going to take, I don't know, because it's kind of the flip sides of it, right? There's the aspect of Halloween, so Nate, you actually brought up a really good point. That is good. So the flip side, or the duality of Halloween, is that there's this triviality caked on top of something that is primordially real, right? Like very, very real, that we all recognize. So I think that's a good point.
Because at its heart, it's evil, right? So it's
right.
All these things are built out of evil, So whether it's zombies, that's a disordered version of a human, an evil version of a human, or mass murderers, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or and obviously these are the extreme examples of Halloween. People can dress up like Captain America, I mentioned earlier, and Captain America's a great guy, from what I know about him. But, so we're talking about the evil aspects here. People dressing up as witches and demons and all these, evil forces. I mean, that's what they are at their core, is evil. So it's a like you said, it's a fictionalization of what we know to be true in evil.
Yeah. So I'm thinking now. I'm trying to. So I think that for the most part, we shouldn't worry too much about Halloween being like some sort of hotspot for demonic activity.
Right.
Because
I don't think I was trying to say that either. If that's what you heard from me.
No. I'm saying just kind of as an overall. Yeah. No, I know you weren't saying
gotcha.
that. I don't think we should view it as that. I also don't know that we should trivialize it to the degree that the world trivializes it. I don't. Yeah, I think that the key is something like utilizing it as a sign which points to a greater reality, right? That even though everybody else is walking around in their spooky costumes and they're taking it lightly, there is a reality behind it all, and so we can participate in the triviality of it. That's fine, right? Like, it's fine to caricaturize things, as long as you also recognize that they're real, right? And the caricature can actually act as a signpost that allows you, or a medium for you to discuss something that's beyond it, right? The reality behind the picture.
Yeah, as Christians, we know these things. We talk about demons all the time. In church, we read about the effects of demons. We read about specific demons impacting people and Jesus casting them out. We read about witchcraft, and we read about the pagan religions, of history. Paul talks, like Eric read earlier, don't give yourself over to these specific things. As Christians, we talk about them all the time. We're very aware of these things. Which it I forget where I was going with that, but something you said made me think, as Christians, we talk about these things a lot. We probably know more about these things and their actual reality than a lot of people do, that think they know it through film or whatever. Maybe Christians are a bit more connected to the actual reality of the forces of evil, and so not connected to, but are aware of the forces of evil in a way that people that caricaturize it aren't.
Yeah.
Let me summarize what I've kind of heard both of you said, because I want to make sure the question I originally posed is being answered. I got kind of lost in my own thoughts there for a minute, so I want to come back to it. But in some sense, we're saying, so one of the key texts that I read was Galatians 5, where Paul says one of the works of the flesh is sorcery, and I kind of related that to Halloween. And Jacob made the careful distinction that people in that day actually believed in those things, that they actually partook in some sort of real demonic activity that they were keenly aware of. Whereas today, in American culture, nobody believes in those things. And we have specific days of the year where we dress up as these things in which we don't believe. And that's key to make that distinction, because it changes how we engage the culture about these things. So Christians today are more so trying to point to the fact that when we dress up as these things, that actually these things really exist in the world, as opposed to Paul's day where that was just blatantly obvious. And Nate, you were kind of saying, essentially the same thing. I think that the signpost thing, again, that transcendent reality is beyond what's going on in our culture today. And we got to use this as a medium to talk about these transcendental things. Nevertheless, I don't know, am I just missing something? My original question is, you have these texts that are saying don't partake, don't do these things, right? And maybe that's where, maybe you guys did answer it, because I think that's kind of where the heart of this matter kind of lies, is the text says don't do these things, not don't have anything to do with these things, I guess. And I say it like that because people kind of take the latter form to say that we should run away from talking about or being even participating in, I guess you could say, Halloween, because people say it's witchcraft and sorcery and things like that. Whereas Paul's saying people are actually doing real things, and don't do those things. And I'm kind of losing myself a little bit, but am I kind of on track with what you guys have been saying?
Yeah, I would say that the rule for me would be, do not trivialize what's real, right? So don't pretend as if demons and those things are either harmless or not real, right? Don't trivialize what's real, but and that could be, you know, the rebuke of the world is that they're trivializing what's real. But the rebuke of the church would be, don't realize or don't treat as if it's real what the world is treating as trivial. Don't treat the caricature as if they think it's real, right? Because that's what makes us look like we're crazy, is like when we say things like, don't, you know, you can't practice Halloween because it's demonic. It's like but the people that are engaging with it they don't believe it's demonic. So that's where like we start looking like we're speaking to an issue that's not even there, right?
Okay, so let me ask you this then, Jacob, because again, just to further the devil's advocate, I'm not saying I believe this myself, but I could say to you, so are we saying therefore Christians should participate in Halloween themselves, like as a custom? Like these people are doing it, but they don't believe in it. We believe in these things, and we're dressing up as these things. Is that a problem in your view?
As long as you are keeping the caricature with the caricature and the real with the real, I think that's the important thing, right? So like, I wouldn't instruct a Christian to go and play with a Ouija board, right? Now, a Ouija board, people say it's not real or it is real. There's a lot of vast Christian opinion on it. I'll just say this. I don't really care whether or not it works or is real. I think the thing that's more important is, why are we trying to mess with the dead, right? Like, what would prompt us to do that? And so I would say that Christians should stay away from things where we're messing with that realm outside. Again, trivializing the real, right? So I think, but like, for your kid to dress up like a fairy with all their other friends who are dressing up like fairies, where nobody actually believes what's happening is a real thing, where the real has left the building, you could say. I would say it's not a problem, right?
So Halloween is acceptable as long as we understand that what we're dressing up as, I'll use plainer terms, what we're picking our costume to be isn't actually a real thing.
Yeah.
We're not, and if we do it in that way, we're not engaging in what Paul said not to do, because the people that were doing it in his time actually believed in an outcome that was going to happen demonically. Like, they were actually engaging with demons, whereas we don't actually think that we're engaging with demons by dressing up as some sort of thing. So would it be bad to like dress up as a demon per se then?
I don't think. I wouldn't say. Again, my rule is that if it's caricatured, and the group that you're with is caricaturing, then you're meeting the people where they're at. I don't think it necessarily is a problem.
As long as your actions aren't ordered towards being in touch with the demonic world.
As long as you know that you're doing it as a caricature, and your friends know you're doing it as a caricature, I don't think it's a problem. But for those little splices where you do have people who believe in the supernatural world, because they do exist, right? Where you go to the slumber party and they're trying to like bring out a ghost from the walls, or I don't know, there's weird stuff that kids try to do. There is some weird little shreds of belief there, and I would say
I was just going to say, that was the next thing I was going to say.
They should back away from that, right? Because
I'm going to mainly think of probably like high school age, middle school age kids, where they're like, well, maybe if I do this, maybe I'll come into contact with something out there.
Right.
Is that the very fact that exists, and all three of us just said yes, I do think that exists somewhere out there. is that good enough to say no Halloween, therefore that? Because we want to guard against even people's smallest desire to come in contact with something spiritual where it might not be what they expect it to be and be something incredibly evil.
Yeah, I think, personally, I think that there's a separation that might need to take place just in the minds of people. I mean, for me, I separate between the actual, like, celebration of really evil, in a way, that is probably a good majority of Halloween, and, like, family trick-or-treating. You know, like, I'm not going to say to my future kids, hey, we're not going to go and do what your friends are doing because this whole holiday is built around the celebration of evil or whatever. You know, it's like, my kids are most likely not going to be dressing up as demons. I'm 99.9% confident of that.
So it's okay if your kids dress up as Mario and go and get some candy, is what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. I think that people should be wary of dressing up as a demon or anything like that, because it familiarizes it in your mind as something that's not real. It fictionalizes it, like we've kind of been saying. Whereas it is a real thing, people do need to be on their toes about it, you know. And it's like, yeah, I mean, as kids, they do believe, like, oh, maybe these things are real, because they're still learning, you know, they're still trying to understand how the world works.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, yeah, you shouldn't caricaturize something that's real. I mean, in the same way that I would have a problem with, you know, our next door neighbor dressing up as, like, I don't know, who's the worst person you can think of right now? Like, like a terrorist? I don't know.
Satan.
Like it. Yeah, I mean, I would have a problem. Yeah, like, I mean, yeah, Hitler's already kind of caricaturized, but it's like,
which I did see as a kid. Like, I literally walking around as a kid. Saw
I know,
people
but
dress
it's
up
like,
as Hitler.
why would you want to dress up as somebody like that?
That's horrible. That's horrible.
It just it becomes a character, right? Hitler is just the worst thing you can ever call somebody at this point, you know. And it's just another thing to say. It's not like he was an actual person who killed 6 million Jews,
Right.
you know, and started World War II. You know, he doesn't become that. He's your Hitler and your Hitler, and it's like Oprah, you know. Now everybody's calling each other Hitler. So in the same way, you know, I wouldn't want people doing that, because it just fictionalizes it in your mind, you know. I'm like, I wouldn't want my kids doing that. I don't think it's appropriate for anybody to be doing that, because I mean, these are real world things that happen and have real world implications.
Okay, so it seems like the both of you are saying, and I'll jump in as well. I think I'm in pretty much full agreement with you guys here. Is there's some measure of prudence as we step into this conversation.
Yeah,
because
certainly.
on the one hand, we would affirm that it's good for kids to engage with people around them. It's okay to dress up as a fictional character like Mario or Elsa or something like that. Well, Elsa is a little more controversial for some people, but
a Disney princess,
yeah, so a Disney princess or something, and go and get candy from people. But we would probably advise against somebody dressing up as a demon or as perhaps even a zombie or Satan or Hitler or something for like that.
I mean, the embodiments of evil, you know,
because what are we really trying to get at here when we're engaging in that sort of thing?
Right.
And one more thing, Jacob, before you go on. Because what we're saying is, when we take our kids out who's dressed as Mario, and we do encounter those things that are evil, where people are dressing up as those things, that's a perfect opportunity to say, this is evil, we shouldn't do those sorts of things. It points to something worse, and it gives us an opportunity to talk about the transcendent with a kid, with somebody else, whatever that may be. Okay, that was kind of my summarizing point. Sorry, go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I think you got it. I would just, I maybe push back a little bit on like I found it interesting when you mentioned the lineup. You said like we would advise against dressing up as a demon or Satan, and then you said Hitler, And I thought to myself, of all of the three of those, I would least prefer the Hitler. Like I would not want Hitler the most. And I was like, why is that? That's really interesting, right? Mm-hmm. Well, because Hitler isn't like there's no sense in which Hitler could be a cartoon. Hitler was
people
real.
actually believe in Hitler. Yes.
Right. And he's like adamantly offensive. Right? So but like with Satan, we all have a little picture that comes to mind when we think of who Satan is. But guess where that comes from? Like Dante. Like that doesn't come from anything that we know, right? Like that, or that comes from, I don't know, maybe it's not Dante, but there's
Sam
a
Smith
there's
at
a
the Grammys.
Just cartoons,
right?
And,
there's
all that nonsense. Yeah.
There's a mythology that's followed, and very much like a kind of a taming of Satan, right? So like I don't even think that like dressing up as Satan or dressing up as a like when we keep saying dress up as a demon, and I'm trying to think what does that
as
look
if
like?
we know what those look like. Yeah,
I don't even know that I've seen someone dress up like a demon before. Like what would that even look like? Like I don't think we have a developed enough mythology, or we have an overdeveloped mythology of what demons and Satan look like. And so I would almost feel more comfortable in the same way that I would like feel comfortable with my kid dressing up like Santa Claus. Like he's not Saint Nick, right? Like Saint Nicholas would have looked incredibly different, right? But Santa Claus, and that's a bad analogy, but like it's about that far, right? The caricaturization is as far as the original Nicholas of Myra was from Coca-Cola's Saint Nick, So anyways, I don't know. I think to say don't dress up like a demon, it reinforces for me that it gives me the same vibe as like the Christians that say like Halloween's evil and we have to stay away. It's like, I don't know, maybe we're just giving too much power to an image that isn't even really accurate. It's just a mythology, right? We've come up with by ourselves.
Interesting.
So,
Well, so then maybe I would say too, maybe to just like, I don't know, give it some more material or some more like solid language around it. I mean, Halloween is the celebration of evil. I mean, it just kind of is. Trick-or-treating is a little bit different, especially when it's just family oriented. Like here in Dallas, there's this mall, and it's a really nice mall. They have all sorts of stores there, from high end to your basic stores. And they do trick-or-treating. Like the stores put on, they have workers there, and they have a safe indoor environment for kids and families to walk around and
I'll take that further, Nate, too, and say churches do trunk-or-treats themselves.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, the cultural aspect of dressing up and going and having candy and all that's fine. But I think that, there's a whole other side where it's celebrating evil. And so when you are putting on a costume and you're putting on that, like, you're almost embodying, not to take it too far because it's just a costume, but you are in a way putting that like evilness on yourself. Instead of like, instead of striving, like, I don't know. I mean,
instead of putting on the full armor of God.
Yeah, I mean, that was on my mind. I'm not trying to be an old man and get off my lawn and whatnot. I'm not trying to kill all the fun, but I think that there is a truth to when you put on an embodiment of evil. I think that does something to you. It either like normalizes it, it fictionalizes it, it just it makes you less ready to actually face evil when it comes for you. Vampires aren't going to come for you, okay? But it's like when you're not able to see that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but I'm pretty sure this is accurate from what I remember. I believe Tertullian, and it's funny because we kind of talked about this in the former podcast before this one, with Tertullian talking about the oh goodness, what were they called? I'm totally blanking. The games. The
gladiatorial games.
Gladiatorial games, thank you. Like Tertullian it's either Tertullian or Cyprian, one of the two, was writing against the games, and particularly writing against Christians going to watch the games because it does something to you spiritually. One does not just watch people being ripped to shreds in live and in person, in particular for them.
One does not just walk into Mordor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I thought you were going to say. Sorry.
No. A dirty secret, I've not read nor watched Lord of the Rings. So shame on me. But anyways, their basic argument is you don't just go into those things and partake in what's happening and walk away unscathed as if that did nothing to you spiritually. And I'm kind of with you on some level, Nate, because I'm still a bit hesitant towards Halloween because there is some level of engagement on our part when we come into these things and do them. And we've talked a lot about how, Halloween in its essence isn't real, and nobody in American culture, at least, actually believes in these things aside from us Christians. But we've kind of made the distinction in saying that caricaturing these particular things, even mythologies, as Jacob put it, doesn't mean that we think that like demonic activity is okay, and like engaging in demonic activity is okay. So really it boils down to like, is doing Halloween engaging in demonic activity, like 1-to-1? And I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that there's some level of prudence that needs to be taken when we approach that matter.
Dude, you're drawing me back in. I gotta pause.
Darn.
Okay, I don't think
so.
So I think like for where it is real, right? Like because the key distinction there is with the gladiatorial games. There's no way you could convince yourself that what's happening isn't real, right? You are engaging
actually, I'm glad
with
you're
something
saying this, Jacob. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
incredibly real, right? And so I think that unless you believe that when you're dressing up as said demon, you are taking on the power of the demon that you're talking about, and unless you're attributing to your act of participation in the caricature, unless you're attributing some sort of like realistic, like off draining into you, right? Like some sort of realistic participation, then I think you're fine. I think that because otherwise, like here's
especially from the Christian perspective too, because you say no, my trust is in Christ,
right?
And
exactly,
His atoning death for us, not in demonic activity and the power of demons. Like I'm not.
I could push back and say, well, then all Christian theater that has to do with murder ought to be stopped, right? Like any instance of a Christian putting on a play where one of them is a murderer, right, or does something evil, ought to be stopped because we would be participating in evil. No, we're participating in the caricaturization of evil. But
I was hesitant to go there, and even to go further and talk about like Chronicles of Narnia or Lord of the Rings as well, because there are those out there who will say, yeah, throw them all out.
Yeah,
the Bible
I'm not
says,
with those people.
Yeah, don't. The Bible
Obviously.
says don't do it. And I think we would dispute that the Bible says don't do it in the way that they're talking about, at least.
That's great that you bring that up, because I wanted to. I mean, we're gonna have to wrap this one up soon, but I think that.
Yeah, I think we're at a good point here.
I'll say this real quick, because I think that people, at our core, we really respond to stories, and so there are stories that uplift, and there are stories that that we can connect to, at least in a way that is in a relationship of admiration. So like when you like Captain America, I keep bringing him up. I don't know why he's on my mind right now. But like
Nate is just a true American.
Yeah.
He just loves America.
Yeah.
God bless America.
But like Captain America, when you look at his character, he's someone who is very loyal. He's very strong. He's somebody that would rather die than let his friends get hurt. He puts everything on the line, like that's someone to be admired, and even in some way, as men, we can relate a little bit better than women can, but it's like, yeah, we're not super soldiers, we're not living in the fantasy world of the MCU, but, as men, we can still take on some of those characteristics, and that's a story, we can at least aspire to be in some way like that, and have those values. I think in the same way, Halloween at its core just has a bad message of celebrating evil, and like horror movies in general, they have horrible messages, and if they have messages at all, it's really just kind of shock and thrill. There's not much story. I think that horror movies aren't really known for their story, but they're known for their gruesomeness. And when we look at those stories, or when we take in that content, I don't know, in some way it just kind of affects us. It just we take that in a bad way. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but
so
go ahead.
The gladiatorial games are bad because we are actually experiencing in person, objectively, something that is evil and terrible, and it affects us spiritually. And when it comes to Halloween, even though we're saying that it's a caricature, and we're not actually trying to harness the power of demons or something like that, or putting our trust in demons or believing in demons, there's still some measure of prudence that Christians ought to take when it comes to either participating or engaging, however you want to put it, with Halloween, because of the culture that it spread itself. Is that kind of what you're trying to say there?
Definitely. I mean, I think that people should be more aware of the content that they're taking in, because I think that, right now, we are ravenous for content. Even myself, I find myself watching a bunch of different TV shows on Netflix, and I think that our current, culture has done this for years, with a weekly lineup of shows that never ends, constant late night shows, constant network TV, and that's just television. Then there's books and movies and all different forms of art and media. And then, I don't know, I think that people should be aware of the content that they're taking in, and what it's actually doing to their minds, their values, their belief, because we get our values from somewhere. And I think that for a long time, so art is communication, so people spread their message or their values through their art. And so movies and TV shows, they have a message, they have values, the characters have values that they have and encompass, and even stories that are told from us, told sympathetically from the view of a murderer or whatever. It's like we're trying to see the person who's doing evil in a sympathetic light, like Joker recently, 2019. You feel terrible for what's happening to Joker in that, you want him to...
But he's an awful human being. Yeah.
But he's an awful human being, and in the end, he becomes an embodiment of murder and destruction. But you're almost like, you almost triumph for him, because you're like, he overcame what he was facing, but he overcame it in an evil way. So we get our values from the content that we impose on ourselves. There are people today, we need to remember this, because it's actually reality, that people believe that they are wolves, that they belong in a wolf pack. I couldn't think of the word. These true beliefs that people hold within themselves, it's like we need to be wary of that, because they came to believe that somehow. And whether it's through mental illness or the content that I'm not saying that anybody who engages with any content is going to think of themselves as wolves, but they learn.
You're saying that there has to be some level of consciousness as we participate and engage with culture.
Yeah, and this is
generally
a much broader point, of just culture and content in general.
Or conscientiousness, I should probably say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and so that's a broad view, but boiling it down to Halloween, like I personally stopped watching horror movies and stopped engaging with horror culture because it made me so afraid. What it did to me was not healthy. Like I would have nightmares about the zombie apocalypse. I would spend hours awake at night. What would I do if this happened? It did something in me. It made me extremely fearful for my life, for my family's life, for the world in general. It changed something in me, at least even for a little bit, to the point where I was more afraid of those things happening than I was like joyful for the things that actually were. It was like it would be hard to focus on certain things.
Interesting.
It might only be for a couple hours, but it still affects you. It still gets your heart racing, and you're like actually worried for what's happening in the movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. And so to zero in on Halloween content, Halloween culture, I think that people really need to be aware of what they're taking in, what they're exposing to their children, what they're taking in, because it does affect you. I really do believe that.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on some general level there, Nate. I think there is some of what you said in there that there could be more that could be said. But Jacob, is there any kind of like final thoughts you want to add? I think we're probably at a good spot to wrap up. We're running a little long on this one, but
yeah, I think we're right at the close. I would just say I think this might warrant a deeper discussion of how humans engage with story, because I think there's some things that we can glean from a discussion of story, and how narrative impacts us, and how it doesn't impact us, right? Because there are senses in which we're able to kind of sift the wheat from the chaff when it comes to storytelling. So I think it requires a deeper dive into that.
Because nobody likes the Left Behind series.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Anyways, Jacob, why don't you wrap us up? And
sure. Well, thanks.
You mean we're not going to talk about Santa Claus next episode?
No, because we wouldn't want to talk about someone who can hear us while we're seeing us while we're sleeping and knows when we're awake. Right? It's important. It's important that we don't talk about that too much, because he might come and visit us, and if he pays too much attention, we might get moved to the naughty list. So I don't want to talk about Santa Claus. I believe in him a little too much for that. Well, thanks guys for listening to this episode of the Triclinium. If you have any questions or comments you want to submit, any ideas you want to submit for further episodes or future episodes, you can submit them at sophomorosofficial@gmail.com. That's SOPHOMOROS official@gmail.com. And as always, may Christ be exalted.